subhanahu wa ta'ala. In another example, the example of man and wife comes together and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes a child to be born. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not dependent on the mother and father to create a child. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do so without a mother and father, like the example of Adam alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do so without a father, like the example of Isa alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do what He wants, how He wants. Now this belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the ultimate causer is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this belief we must bring into our hearts. That when we sit out in the morning, yes, apparently Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put down a system. That system is that when you will sit out in the morning, when you will wake up early and seek your sustenance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide you with that sustenance. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not dependent on the means in order to provide you with that sustenance. But rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent. He can provide you with the means, He can provide you without the means. And even if you think of a scenario, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can provide for you against the means. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to do something, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will definitely do that. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, at the young age of, when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, he was about 14 years of age. So well before that, at the most, he would be 14 years of age. The Prophet ﷺ seeks to teach him certain things. What does the Prophet ﷺ want to teach him? First and foremost, usually when it comes to us, a very important aspect of the development of our children, the first thing we think about is the akhlaq of the children, the character of the children, which is very important. But as important as it is secondary to the belief of that child. So when the Prophet ﷺ is talking to Ibn Abbas while he is riding in Pinion with the Prophet ﷺ, he's riding at the back of the Prophet ﷺ. Then the Prophet ﷺ says to him, Ya ghulam inni u'allimuka kalamatin. Oh ghulam, I want to teach you certain things. And to cut the hadith short, the Prophet ﷺ says, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْأُمَّةِ لو اجتمعت على أن ينفعوك بشيء لم ينفعوك إلا بشيء كتب الله لك. That if everybody wants to come together and they want to benefit you in a particular way, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want you to be benefited, then you won't be benefited. In the same way, if everybody comes together, they use whatever apparent means they have, and they want to work against you, they want to harm you, right? No harm will befall you unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants any harm to befall you. So this belief, right, is the first step and the most important step in terms of our independence. We are not dependent on anybody or anything. We will use those means, yes, but ultimately we are only dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because everything only comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us this tawfiq, inshallah, to instill within our hearts this proper iman, this proper yaqeen, that we have absolute belief in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, absolute belief in the promise of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and this will ensure our success both in this world as well as in the hereafter. Just to end off, the point of in terms of our children, what we teach them, yes, it's important to teach them akhlaq, but more important than that, the first step that we should be teaching them is to teach them iman. We gave an example of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the practice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he taught Ibn Abbas iman. Another story which is mentioned in the Holy Quran, the story that of Luqman. There's a difference of opinion amongst the ulama whether Luqman was a wise person, a pious person, or whether he was a prophet from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be it as it may be, the Quran records some of the advices that Luqman gives to his son. The first advice he says to him, إِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِبْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ. The first thing that he tells his son is what? لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ. Don't associate partners unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, believe in the one Allah. Establish this iman in your heart, belief in the one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then afterwards, what does he say? إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. And then afterwards, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ إِحْسَانًا. Then he talks about advising his son that be good to your parents. So be good to your parents is an aspect of our character, which we must have. But even before that, what is more important than that in terms of importance? It is that we must instill within our children iman. And this is very important. And that is the reason for the 7 formative years of a child. Many of us are preoccupied with sending our children to early learning programs. But more important than the early learning programs, more important than setting the platform and the basis for the intellectual development of our children, more important than even setting the platform for building of good character in our children is setting the platform for the growth of Iman within their hearts. Why do children, have you ever asked yourself this question, why do children have this overactive imagination? Anything you tell a child will believe. But as the child grows older, what happens? He becomes more real. Now this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has facilitated for us. That these formative 7 years of the child is actually for us to plant the seeds of Iman within the hearts of the children. That child must realize, and that child must know from that young age that it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who does. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq inshallah, to practice on whatever has been said inshallah, to renew our Iman, to make tajdeed of our Iman, to look after our Iman, to safeguard our Iman, to take those measures which will increase us in our Iman. بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.